In this video, I'll be talking about color correction, primary grading, secondary grading, and what the key differences are between these processes. So color correction, as the name implies, is the process of correcting or ensuring that the colors that you've got in your picture actually look like what they should have been in the real world setting. The difference in color could be due to a number of reasons. This could include the color profile of the camera that you've selected, the white balance, artificial light sources in the scene, um, the dynamic range of the image maybe, and all of these factors can sometimes basically give you false colors or colors that are slightly off from what they actually should be or what you see in the real world setting. So your skin tones might look a little bit cooler than what they should, um, and that happens a lot when you're mixing flash lighting without gel with outdoor natural lighting, for example. So what we are aiming to do during color correction is getting the colors to look natural again for the setting the picture has been shot in. We need to ensure, for example, that the skin tones look natural for the environment and for the scene that the person is in. In this image, for example, I know that it wasn't as bright. You can see it's a long exposure, 8 seconds, and although we're seeing the cyan and light blues, it was actually quite dark blue when we looked at it from the naked eye. So if I go and change the white balance to auto, it actually gets worse. If I revert it back to as shot, and maybe change the color temperature, push it more to the left, this is probably more in line with what I was seeing at the time. So the next bit is actually the grading. In color correction, we're trying to make the colors look what they should be in terms of how they were in the natural and the realistic scene when we took the picture. With color grading, you're grading the image, you're pushing it to the kind of colors that you want to make it look like, to evoke emotion maybe, set the mood, and so on. So what painters used to do and still do basically with oils, for example, is they would pick a certain shade, a certain color, or a certain pigment, and they would mix it in all the other shades in the palette that they've got. So for example, in this case, if I go and select the highlights, make them a bit orangey, increase the saturation a bit, and I do the same with the shadows, so push the hue of the shadows to a bit more orange, start increasing the saturation. What I'm doing essentially is taking the shade of orange and I'm mixing it with all the different colors that I've got in the scene. So my blues have a little bit of this orange, my reds and browns and greens all have this bit of orange, and what that does is it creates a more harmonious look, and it gives, because you're mixing the same color, the same pigment with every other color, it kind of gels all your colors together. So you're pushing the entire color palette towards a certain grade, towards a certain color. Alternatively, you could push different colors in opposite directions. So in this case, I'm pushing the blues, the shadow areas, the darker areas, more into the blues, and I'm pushing the brighter areas more towards the red and orange. So opposite sides of the color wheel, which is creating a contrasty look in terms of color. So in this case, for example, with grading, what we're doing effectively is creating a stylistic look. that is taking us away from how we naturally view the world with our own two eyes. You do have to use this with caution. So if you remember Uncle Ben's words, with great power comes great responsibility, you shouldn't be heavy-handed with your use of grade, because what you can end up doing is basically uh, making the grade overpower all the details that you've got in the scene. So your shadows will start looking flat, your shadows will start losing detail. Same thing with your highlight. If you push it too far, you start losing detail in the highlights. So you have to think about it very carefully, and you have to think about what kind of treatment you want for the image. Also, not every image needs to be graded, so you have to think about what you are trying to convey with the certain image and apply the appropriate treatment. Grading should never be used as an option for hiding flaws within the image. I've seen people do that, I've seen students do that, and really this is completely the wrong approach. If there is a problem with the image, fix that problem first. Having said that, there will be times when some problems will go away just by pushing the grade a bit, but this is certainly not best practice and should be avoided if possible. The other thing that you might come across are these terms: primary grade, primary color grade, and secondary color grade. And there are different definitions for these. Some people might refer to the primary color grade as these settings that you've got here, which is setting the highlights and shadows, getting them in line across different images. And then the secondary color grade is when you start working on selective areas of selective color tones. But when it comes to film and film editing, essentially what we're doing is with secondary color grade, it's about making each shot look like it was shot in the same time, in the same space, and under the same lighting conditions. Now, when you're filming different scenes, what might happen is the lighting may change slightly, and you might have a great number of takes, and when you actually choose the specific takes and you edit and put them together, they might not sit very well in terms of color. So what you would probably have to do is basically normalize the colors across the scene for each of those shots, and that is known as your primary color grade when it comes to film editing. So what you're ensuring is there is no color discrepancy between different shots of the scene, and once you've kind of made them uniform, then the secondary color grade is applied, which is then taking the colors where you want them to go for the entire film. So in this case, of course I'm not working with film here, but what I do have is a panorama. So this is a HDR sequence that I've shot, and you can see the images here, starting from this image here. So what I've got is 1, 2, 3, three exposures. Actually, this was a test, so let's go somewhere here. 1, 2, 3, 4 exposures. So I've got these 4 different exposures: 4 seconds, 30 seconds, 15 seconds, and this is 4 seconds again, so the next one. So what I've done is I've merged these exposures together, but before merging them, I have played around with the values here for each one of these. So I've gone and pushed the highlights down on the brightest exposure that I've got. I've increased the shadows a bit. I've increased the exposure a little bit. On the darker ones, I haven't done much, but I've for the panorama, I've just used the brightest image that I've got all across. So I've taken these settings and I've synced all of these other files that I've got all across. And I've applied that same kind of settings to all of these files. And then I've merged them together in this one single panorama. And so if you think about it, for each one of these files, when I'm pushing these colors around, I'm basically getting all of them to become more uniform. It's a very loose example. And then after merging them together over here, I'm again pushing these adjustments and pushing the highlights down. I'm ramping up the shadows, increasing the contrast. I'm doing the same thing with the tone curve as well. And what I end up with is this image, which is the outcome of this two-part operation. So I've worked with the individual components first, and I've tried to get them to a base level where I want them. I've combined them together, and then I've performed additional color grading on top, pushing these colors, increasing the saturation, and so on. So that is basically what all of these processes are about. Color correction is ensuring that the colors look like what they should for the setting the picture was shot in. Primary color grade ensures consistency of colors within each scene across the shots. And secondary color grade is enhancing or manipulating the colors to apply the treatment that you want to your scene.